Hi everyone. In this lesson we'll be looking at developmental theories of career counseling. Earlier this semester we looked at trait factor theories, which largely try to match an individual's traits with the traits of a career or career workplace. In developmental theories, we're looking at theories of career counseling or career development that focus on the individual developmental process that happens within people. Career development is seen in these theories as a lifelong process. And they largely focus on vocational development in terms of self-concept. The self-concept, as it becomes realistic and stable, vocational choice and behavior become more realistic and more stable as well. People choose occupations that permit them to express their self-concepts, and work satisfaction is related to the degree that they've been able to implement their self-concepts. All of these developmental theories have these basic ideas or principles in common. In each of these developmental theories, individuals are thought to choose their careers or make career choice through self-awareness, and this self-awareness is determined by many different factors: social class, level of interest, experience with sex typing, and there are other factors as well that go into this. The individual's level of development, both emotionally and cognitively, of course, go into this as well. And counselors are helping clients understand how development influences the perception of the work role. And so the focus really is on where are clients or where are people in their process of career development. What stage of development are they in? What tasks are they trying to accomplish or work through in these particular stages? Three of the most important developmental theorists that we'll look at are Eli Ginsberg, Donald Super, who is probably best known for career counseling theory, and David Tiedemann and Robert O'Hara. We'll spend most of our time on Donald Super's theory of career development. Eli Ginsberg published his career development theory in 1951, and he emphasized the importance of decision making in the career choice process. He theorized that decision making was influenced by adolescent adjustment patterns, and occupational decision making was a lifelong process. But his theory of development really focused on the first 20 years of life, which is a bit limited in terms of the lifespan, but we see him first beginning to develop or promote this idea of a developmental view, which was much different from the trait factor theories. He says your career decision is the optimal adjustment between your ideal preference and the available job opportunities. So this is still somewhat of a trait factor model, but he's stressing the importance of that developmental process in coming to the place of decision making for career choice. And you can see here his three developmental stages and the different phases that are involved in each of those stages. The first stage is the fantasy stage from 0 to 11 years, and this is where children are thinking about what they want to become, and their ideas largely revolve around these kind of fantastic professions like being a ballerina or an astronaut. And of course some people do go on to do those things, but these are idealized careers or professions. They are professions that seem to have some kind of ideal quality that children are interested in, and largely most people realize that they're not going to, in later in life, that they're not going to grow up to be ballerinas or astronauts or Olympians or things of that nature. But in this fantasy stage, children are just starting to branch out and think about what it is that they're wanting to do in their adult lives. In the years from 11 to 17 years, Ginsberg says that this is the tentative stage, and this is where interest and awareness of interest begins to come into play. Um, People begin to develop an awareness of their skills, their capacities, and they begin to develop an awareness of what's important to them, their values. And each of these kind of unfolds one on top of the other. The interests come first, and then as interests develop, then capacities, and then values. And then there's a transitioning into awareness that these are not just things that are true about me as a person, but rather they are things that are true about um, how I connect with and how I think about career choice. So this is the tentative stage, and then in the years 17 to 20 years old, Ginsberg identifies as the realistic stage, where exploration of actual careers takes place, some kind of crystallization process where there's a kind of a fermenting about career ideas, a setting of, or a cementing of career ideas, and then specification or specialization can begin to happen after that. Now, Donald Super came along and he developed and expanded upon this notion of career development, or the developmental approach to career choice. He first introduced this idea of the self-concept, this set of beliefs about self that answers the question, who am I? And he thought that self-concept emerges as one progresses through developmental stages, either successfully, which produces a healthy self-concept, or unsuccessfully, which produces an unhealthy self-concept. So if one of the developmental stages is interrupted, or is stalls for some reason, or is not progressed through appropriately, then unhealthy self-concept would develop. He said career is the expression of self-concept. In choosing an occupation, one is, in effect, choosing a means of implementing a self-concept. The self-concept, according to Super, is a product of complex interactions among a number of factors. And we'll look at a few more of these factors later on, but they would include things like physical and mental growth, personal experiences, the environment, stimulation, what experiences are stimulating or impactful in the person's life. Super suggested that self-concept theory might be better called personal construct theory, to show the individual's dual focus on self and situation. Now, this idea of self-concept, as you might imagine, can produce some problems because it is something that is not very well defined so far. Its definitional breadth and non-definitional specificity present problems for how to contain it to a particular construct that can be measured or can be researched well. The definition and measurement of self-concept, these have been both unwieldy and subject to the interpretation of individual researchers. And of course, in cases like that, it's very, very hard to define something well in such a way that it can be researched with reproducible results. There's also some selection bias here and some cultural boundedness, because the idea of self-concept largely has been based on a small group of middle-class males, white males, who have had freedom of choice in occupations. And of course, this is not always the case. Many people in many parts of the world, in many cultures, in many places in society, within the larger culture, have much more limited choice options in terms of occupation. And this presents a real problem for developing the universality of the idea of self-concept. One of the benefits of developmental theory is that it really helped to push aside this notion of one peg fits one hole that we found in some of the earlier models of trait factor theories. Developmental approaches assert that people are qualified for a number of occupations, a wide number of occupations. Occupations have a characteristic pattern of abilities and personality with a wide tolerance, wide enough to allow variety, and some variety of occupations for each individual, and some variety of individuals in each occupation are both thought to be consistent and standard with career choice theory. Now, in developmental theories, self-concepts can change and do change with time and experience, with vocational preferences and competencies, and the situations in which people live and work. So depending on where people find themselves in terms of their vocations, their competencies, their context, self-concept can really change with time. Self-concepts are thought to be increasingly stable from late adolescence until late maturity. So as time goes on, there is greater stability, but there is not a sense of immutability. The process of self-concept development can be summed up in a series of stages, and the developmental stages that superdeveloped we'll talk about in just a moment. These stages occur when a person is destabilized by a reduction in force, illness, or personal events. So each stage develops and kind of stabilizes, and then something happens in the life of the individual, some of it natural processes, that destabilizes the stages and leads to another stage. Super conceptualized both developmental stages and developmental tasks. The stages that he saw, you can see here, are much more expansive than Ginsberg's, and they range from birth up to retirement age. Growth, exploratory, establishment, maintenance, and decline. In Super's growth stage, the development of capacities, attitudes, interests, and needs related to self-concept are developed. This happens in Super's idea from birth through the age of 14 approximately. And he said that physical and psychological development shape your self-concept during these ages. And there is a lot of physical and psychological development that's going on. The growth stage is broken up into substages: pre-vocational, in which there's no interest in careers at all; fantasy, which is much like Ginsberg's fantasy stage; the interest substage; and the capacity substage. And you can see that this is very much like Ginsberg, where each stage is kind of building on the prior substage, where first children begin to fantasize about careers, and then they begin to learn about their own interests. Some things are more preferable to them than other things, and as they learn about their interests, then their capacities would begin to become known as well. And there is some question about whether interest and capacity have some direct relationship, whether people develop capacities because they're interested in those things, and so they participate in them and they practice them, and therefore those capacities develop. There certainly is some case to be made for that. Or whether people develop interests because they have certain natural capacities. Now, there's probably some overlap of those two, but not a direct correlation. After the growth stage comes the exploration stage, or the exploratory stage. This happens between the ages of 15 and 24 approximately. And in the exploration stage, choice is narrowed, career choice is narrowed, but not finalized. This is a stage when people become aware that career will be a major part of their lives, and they begin to think about and explore occupations more intentionally. There are 3 substages in the exploration stage: the tentative substage, in which people form tentative choices; the transition substage, in which people develop some realistic considerations about employment opportunities. So it's going from thinking about career in kind of fantasy and just ideas of possibilities into a awareness of some of the realities that begin to constrain choice. And then the trial substage is where people begin to find and try out beginning work roles, but certainly are not making any final commitments to work in any way. The establishment stage comes next from the mid-20s through the mid-40s, and this is a time that's marked by trial and stabilization through work experiences. People believe that they found their field of work and they try to create a permanent place in that field of work for themselves. And there are two substages that occur during the establishment stage. The first is stabilization, in which there's some commitment made to a field of work. Now, this can come after one or two career changes. It can just come immediately upon the very first career choice that a person makes. It can come after many different trials of work experiences. But it's marked by this commitment to a particular career choice. And then there's the advancement substage. As the career pattern becomes clearer, people put forth effort to make a secure place for themselves, and so they're looking for advancement and promotion and trying to maybe kind of work their way into a better or more specialized subfield of the particular occupational choice that they've made, or they're trying to kind of make a name for themselves, develop a reputation, build a clear, reliable client base, things of that nature come in the advancement substage. After advancement comes maintenance. This is marked by a continual adjustment process to improve one's working position and situation. And the major concern here is just continuation in the chosen profession. Just continuing to do the work, do it well, find some satisfaction in it. A routine is developed at this point, a definite sense of belonging to the profession. Then finally, disengagement or decline, which typically happens in the mid-60s or sometime thereafter. People begin thinking about retirement. Their work output is reduced. They then eventually do go on to retire. As physical and mental activity decreases and work slows down, disengagement takes place. And there are two substages here: deceleration, which is a decline in the work activity, and then retirement. Super also conceptualized developmental tasks in addition to the developmental stages, and these are tasks that take place either within or between particular developmental stages. The first of these is crystallization, which tends to happen between the ages of 14 and 18, and there's in this stage a cognitive formulation of general vocational goals. So vocational goals become crystallized, and they begin to become set for the individual. And then there's specification, moving from tentative choices to preferences in vocation, as an individual specifies their particular career or occupational choices. Then comes the implementation task, which occurs between the ages of 21 and 24, completing vocation preferences and entering the workforce. Implementation takes place. Then comes stabilization in the mid-20s to the mid-30s, confirming the preferred career through work experience. If stabilization does not happen, someone might go back into an earlier stage of exploration again to try to find a new career choice, and then stabilization would be attempted again. And then the final task, consolidation from the age 35 and up, establishment in career through advancement and seniority. So you should be able to see how each of these tasks fits with the particular developmental stages and the unfolding developmental process. Now, these developmental stages and tasks, they are a general outline. Not everyone certainly follows these particular stages and tasks in the timeline given by Super. But I think that he would say, given the time period and the culture that was present while the research was going on and continues to go on, that these are general guidelines for thinking about this developmental process of career choice. The developmental stages and tasks are a part of Super's full lifespan theory. And his lifespan theory postulates several ideas. First, people have different abilities, interests, and values, and therefore are qualified for different occupations or jobs which all need different abilities and personality traits. Second, people change over time, and with experience so do their abilities and interests and values. And then third, people go through life stages whereby they experience growth, exploration, establishment, maintenance, and decline in their career life. Super's lifespan theory also contained the idea of career maturity or adaptability, which occurs when a person is able or willing to engage in the developmental tasks that are appropriate to the age and career level in which he or she finds himself or herself. Super's theory also postulated 6 life roles, which he included in a life career rainbow, which include homemaker, worker, citizen, leisure role, student, and child role. And these roles are taken up by people at different times of life and in different situations. Some people can have more than one role happening at once, but they tend to be functioning primarily in one role at a time. And then the Archway model, which we'll look at in just a moment, is a model of career determinants, and it states that people develop a self-concept through which they test out their occupations that will allow them to be their ideal self. But this self-concept is produced or developed by a wide variety of factors. The self-concept that Super conceptualized is through which people test out their occupations, and that allows them to develop them or to be their ideal self. He theorized this self developing through this archway of career determinants. And he saw this archway as being things that contributed to one's development of their self-concept. In this archway, you have a left-hand column that is largely comprised of personal qualities. So the biographical components, one's needs and values and interests, which are supported and developed through one's intelligence and aptitudes and their special attributes, and these things contribute to one's personality and contribute to one's achievement. On the right-hand column, you have the geographical elements, the economy, society, the labor market, and these things are all found and manifested in the community and school and family and peer groups. These are the contextual elements that go into the development of the individual. These things all, both of these columns contribute to the advancement through the developmental stages and the development of the self-concept. So Super is an early voice for advocating for both nature and nurture being contributing factors to the development of one's self-concept. In this particular case, specifically for the purpose of the development of career selection. Super also had a theory of work satisfaction. He believed that sometimes people have to compromise between their self-concept and reality, and we can certainly understand his inclusion of this idea. Work satisfaction depends on the extent to which the person finds adequate outlets for self-concept. So this compromise between one's self-concept and reality, it manifests in finding an outlet for that self-concept in the occupational world. And the degree of satisfaction then is proportional to the degree to which they have been able to implement self-concept in that occupational field. A final component of Super's theory is the idea of career patterns. And Super thought that career development often follows these fairly typical patterns. So the conventional pattern, for example, is that a person goes to school and then has one or two or three trial jobs and then finds their place in the career of their choice and they find stable employment. That's one pattern that takes place. Occupational stable is a variant of this, in which a person has school and then a series of jobs in the same occupation, but for different employers. And then organizational stable is another variant of this, where there's school and then employment in one organization, but in different occupations in the same company or organization. So these two are modifications of this conventional pattern, where someone has school and then a few trials and then stability and employment. Then we have the double track pattern, which is school followed by two occupations pursued at the same time. The interrupted pattern is school, then work experience, then suspension of work. So this could be a woman who leaves the work world to care for a child or for children. This could be someone who is laid off, someone who is injured or sick for an extended period of time, and then they return to the world of work after some absence. You can see how this would create unique challenges for the person in this pattern. And then unstable and multiple trial are both similar, but just slightly different. The unstable pattern is less stable. School, then alternating sequence of trial and unstable jobs with no permanent occupation. And the multiple trial would be school followed by a series of occupational changes in unrelated trial jobs without really establishing a career. So the unstable position or pattern would be bouncing from place to place, from job to job, whereas the multiple trial is someone who is attempting to find a pattern or a stable career for themselves, but is not really able to establish a career in a particular field. Of course, there are a variety of factors that affect career patterns. The socioeconomic status of someone when they're growing up, one's mental or cognitive abilities, one's education, the skills that they are able to develop or have the opportunity to develop, one's needs or values, interests, traits, all of the self-concept components would go into one's ability to have a stable career pattern. Their career maturity, in other words, their ability to move through those developmental stages and complete the developmental tasks, and then simply just opportunities. So all of these are going to affect career pattern. As we end thinking about developmental theories, I want to talk about one final developmental career theory, which is developed by David Tiedemann and Robert O'Hara. And they said that career development parallels the general process of cognitive development. Decision making is an important component of this process. Striking a balance between integration, becoming part of a career, and differentiation, retaining individuality and determining one's unique differences compared to others. This is an important component of building vocational identity. So Tiedemann and O'Hara are going to follow more of a cognitive developmental approach, which will differ somewhat from Super. You can see two primary stages that they conceptualize in cognitive development. One is anticipation or preoccupation, and then two is implementation or adjustment. So the anticipation or preoccupation stage has exploration, crystallization, choice, and clarification. And the implementation stage has induction, where someone's trying to become part of the new work group, reformation, which involves influencing the group as much as the group influences you, and integration, which is becoming a working member of the group. And so when you look at cognitive development, which is different from an overall approach to career development like Super gave, then you can find some of these significant differences in how development is conceptualized. The big takeaway here is that these two were interested in thinking about cognitive development and how it influences career choice, and also integrating in and differentiating from one's occupational environment. So we have looked at developmental career theories today, and their focus on how career selection is influenced by the developmental processes that people naturally move through, rather than the looking specifically at traits that are inherent in the individual. We saw that Super offered the most comprehensive developmental theory that's still useful for contemporary career work, and that his theory included developmental stages, developmental tasks, a theory of the lifespan, a theory on career determinants, and insight into career patterns. Super was one of several influential developmental theorists, including Ginsberg, who kind of started the developmental process in career theory thought, and then Tiedemann and O'Hara, who thought about cognitive career development.